Hey guys, as you know by now, my name is Bo Milanovic, and after being gone for a while, I'm back, as I said in my last video. And if you haven't seen my last video, the one before it, please do. That's the video where I explain exactly, why I've been gone for a while and what has been going on in the software world, particularly what relates to us in terms of Qt and Python development. Um, in this video, we're actually going to go back to our infamous PyData man, um, and continue working on reaching our development goal of having an actually useful application that we will later build into an executable file and even build an installer. I know a lot of you have been waiting for that, so stay tuned, and that's coming up pretty soon as we're done with our application. Before I proceed, however, I would like to make a couple of announcements. I have started a development blog, and this blog can be found at dev.bomilanovic.com. There's still not a whole lot of stuff right here since I've only just started, as you can see, March 31st, and that was yesterday. But this blog will basically be a collection of my tips, tricks, code snippets, and such as I go through my software engineer's life. For example, right here, the post that I have is virtualenv. Why is it amazing? Virtualenvs are not something we discussed in this course, but it is a very useful Python feature that is available to all Python users, and it's actually very useful. Amongst other things, I explain in this post not only how to use it, but why it can be useful. The two things or two links I would like to point your attention to is my GitHub profile. And if I open it, you will be able to see all the repositories that I have and all that. Now, I haven't been a whole lot active lately on GitHub, as you can tell. Unfortunately, it's for the same reason I haven't been active on Udemy either. But it's starting to get better. As you can see here, there's several commits. So fork me, clone me, do whatever you want, send pull requests. This is the repository where I'll be storing the code that is that we have in this Udemy course. Right now, it's at this point is outdated a little bit. There's still some old code there, but I will update that as soon as I can. And if I close this, I would kind of like if you guys join the Google Plus community that I've created, and there's already a few people that have joined. So far we have 24 members, and this is basically a Python GUI programming community. And I have a couple of posts here as well. So I will leave a link to this, and I'll send probably an email out to everyone once this video is actually published. And I will leave a link to this as well, so that you can all join and that you can all follow me in my development blog. On my development blog, I will not only talk about Python, although that will likely be the primary focus. Some of you may know that I'm also a .NET developer, mostly dealing with C# and ASP and also some Java, which is not .NET, but anyway. So I'll sometimes leave those things as well in here. JavaScript, XML, XSLT, HTML, and all that good stuff. But I think it will be a good collection of tips to have, especially because I'll be reaching into Python 3 and some of the new features it introduces that are actually very cool. All right, without further ado, oh yes, one thing I forgot to mention. This blog is actually built on a platform called Nicola. What's specific about Nicola is that it is written in Python, and it is very easily deployable to a web server. And it is actually static content. It generates from the markdown or restructured text or even HTML a static content website that are later rendered using the Nicola's engine, or the specifically engine that it's dealing with in terms of HTML template, Jinja 2 in this case. It also deals with Mako. But you probably, I don't know if you've heard of Jinja 2 or Mako or some other Python frameworks. You may have not. but maybe that's one more reason why you could visit this every now and then, because I'll talk about those as well, how to deploy a website using Python. And another thing I like about Nikola is that it got its name after Nikola Tesla. And most of you have probably heard about Nikola Tesla. He's the guy who invented alternating current, without which you probably wouldn't be watching this video right now. And also the guy who invented a lot of amazing things, such as Tesla coil. There's even an international unit called Tesla, which is Weber per square meter, for magnetic fields. And he's basically dealt a whole lot with magnetism, radio waves, and all that. I'm also especially proud, since I'm from Serbia, I'm Serbian. Nikola Tesla is also Serbian, so he's one of the heroes of our nations, of our nation, that is. Now, let's get into the code. As luck would have it, aside from other things that were happening to me while I was gone, one of the things that also happened is that I had a hard drive failure. Very huge hard drive failure. It was a 2 terabyte hard drive, and it just so happened that that hard drive hosted all the code that I have on Udemy. Now, I know it's terrible. I did back up, however, all the code, but guess what? That other hard drive died. In fact, in the last year, I've replaced a total of 3 hard drives, and I lost all the code that I had on Udemy. I didn't make a backup of the backup. So I actually had to rewatch a bunch of my videos to recreate the PyDataMan code here, as well as the design. Now, before I completely continue, and I'm sorry for keeping you waiting here, I mentioned in the previous video that I will likely continue working in Linux. I decided not to do so, just so that I don't confuse you guys some more. You probably don't need a whole lot of confusion now that we're dealing with some serious stuff, quote unquote. So I'm back to Windows 7, however. I'm still running Linux. This is running in a virtual machine. I'm back to Windows 7, and yes, so that shouldn't make any difference from your perspective, whatever platform you're coding on. Let's run this application right now and see if it still works. And looks like it does. As you can see, PyDataMan opens, and as of this moment we don't really have a whole lot going for it. And like I said in the that last video from over a year ago, it doesn't really do anything at this point of time. So what should be the first thing that we're going to do? Well, you know what? Maybe one of the most exciting things would be for us to actually add the data that we input here to the QTable widget down below, and also commit it to the SQLite database that we have so conveniently created earlier. So I'm going to close this, and if you'll remember, there's that add button clicked method that we have created when we're creating the skeletal structure of our code. And this is the the method that's going to be called when the Q button or the Q push button sends an event that it has been clicked. So this is where we're going to put our stuff in terms of what happens exactly when the Q push button has been clicked. Now I'm going to erase this pass right here, and I'm going to define the fields that are the QLine edits and that we're going to enter into our table and our database. So I'm going to say username equals self.username.text. First name is self.firstname.text. Phone is self.phone number, I believe, yes, .text. Address is self.address.text. And finally, approved is actually a Q checkbox. Oopsie. Is self.approved.isChecked. As you probably are aware, this actually doesn't return a string as opposed to all these. This one returns a bool, so true or false. Now let's deal with entering the stuff into the table. entering items into a QTable widget is somehow dealt with in a somewhat of a strange fashion, in that there's uh, there's what seems to be possible to be done automatically by the Qt framework itself. You have to do manually. This doesn't really, it just looks kind of weird, at least to me, that you would have to do this, uh, even though I don't think that, I mean, in C Sharp you certainly don't have to do this. But anyway, I guess that's the way they chose to go about things, so we're not going to criticize, we're just going to follow along for now. The first thing I need to do is define the number of current rows. So I'm going to create a variable called current row count, and this is going to grab the property of row count from the main table that we have defined in our designer. And in order for us to insert into the table, we first have to insert a row, and we're going to say self.main_table.insert row, and we're going to pass this current row count as a parameter. This ensures that the row is inserted at the end of the table. This current row count is obviously going to be updated every single time this method is called. And that's kind of what I meant by weird. I mean, I would, in a way, expect not us having to deal really with the getting the current row count and then inserting in the end. I would prefer to have an insert at end method that maybe takes no parameters. But again, that's the way they decided to go about it. Now, in order for us to actually enter the items into the table, we're going to say self.main_table.setItem is the method we're going to call. And now we have to pass some parameters. First of all, we need to pass the row that we are inserting this data into. That row will also be that same row, current row count. So as you can see, it's a little bit confusing. The second thing is the column, and since obviously as everything else in Python in general in programming world, this is zero based, we're going to say column number 0, which is from the user's perspective column number 1, or the leftmost column. That's the one that contains the username. And finally, we have to put the username, but we can't just put username, we have to actually cast it into a QTable widget item class. So to do that, you simply do QTable widget item username. Why do we have to do this? Well, simply because the main table.setItem method doesn't take a string as a parameter at the end. This is not a disadvantage at all whatsoever. It may seem confusing at first, but later on in this course we will experiment with some of these QTable widget items, and you'll see what are some amazing things that it can do that looks very cool. And then I'm just going to copy paste this. How many times? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 2, 3, 4, 5. And simply replace this. So I have to replace the row number, or the column number as well. This is in order. And replace the username from username to first name, from a username to phone, address, and approved is, since this is a checkbox, the QTable widget item does not take a bool or a boolean as a parameter, or as its a constructor parameter. So we have to pass a string, and the way I've decided to go about this is do a one-line if statement, and we're going to say something like approved if approved, else not approved. And if you know Python, this is fairly obvious to you, and if you, or maybe some of you know Python quite well, but are unaware of this kind of one-line if statement. Basically what it says, do approved, put the string approved, if approved evaluates to true, and this is where we have our approved defined. This can be either true or false. Else, so if this is not true, just say not approved. With this, we have inserted the data into the table. But remember that it is not enough for us to just insert the data into the table. We also have to save our changes to the database, the SQLite database that we have defined earlier. If you'll recall, we have it right here. And I'm not sure if in the latest video I found a small syntax error that I had. I forgot I omitted a parenthesis at the end. So if you don't have a parenthesis at the end right here, add it, because it created a syntax error when I tried to run this program, and I copy pasted from the screen and made the same error again actually. So anyway, we also have to, like I said, commit these changes to the database. And the way we're going to do about this, we're going to do a little bit of, it's also somewhat strange, but then again, we have to do some SQL. We're going to create a new variable that we're going to call parameters. And this variable, or this is actually going to be a tuple. The first tuple element is going to be none, as in a reserved keyword none. And then we're going to go in the same order as above. Approved. Now, here's the thing. So, as you can see here, when we created our table, the first table column in this case, so we're talking about the SQL database, SQLite database in this case, not the GUI table that we have in our software. The first column is the ID, which is integer, type integer, which is primary, and which is key. So it's a primary key. This is why the first parameter right here is none, because this is basically automatically defined by the SQLite engine. Secondly, and don't worry about, by the way, don't worry about these variables here not matching the variable names here. That doesn't just, it's all the same to it. So as you can see, all the other ones are text, or the type text, and which is fine for most of our use cases, because we all have strings right here, and those are equivalent to text. But as you can see, status here, and I guess that's approved in our case, this is not a string, as I mentioned earlier, this is a Boolean. And SQLite, I think it does not actually support Boolean yet. I might be wrong, and if I'm wrong, do let me know for sure, because I would love for it to support Boolean. So we have to actually cast this approved part into a string. This will essentially just write true or false to the database as a string. The reason I'm not using this part right here is because later in this course I'm going to show you how to manipulate transferring from strings to Boolean, or evaluating the strings to Boolean, etc. Now that we have our parameters defined, we need to actually create as an SQL query. So the way I'm going to do this, or execute it at the same time, I'm going to say self.dbCursor, and remember the dbCursor variable that we have, or the cursor object is self.dbcon.cursor that we have defined earlier. Just, if you need to rewatch the video where we define the advanced skeletal structure of our code, where I explain more in depth of what's going on. So anyway, so we have the self.db database cursor, and then we call the .execute, the same method that we called when I created this table. And now I'm going to say, instead of, since I'm not creating a table this time, I'm rather inserting into it. I'm going to, have a multi-line string here, and I'm going to say insert into main, and remember this main is the name of our table right here. So if you picked some other name for your table, that's where you need to put right here. Values. And now this is going to look strange, but that's just the way the SQLite binding for Python works. I'm going to say question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark. A total of 6 question marks. And if you count right here, we have 6 parameters as well. So these need to match. If you have 6 parameters that you want to pass into the database, you need to have 6 question marks. Finally, as a second parameter to the execute method, we pass our parameters. I am not, if you'll recall, executing the SQL query itself doesn't do anything to the database itself, so we need to commit our changes just as we did right here. So I'm just going to call self.dbcon in this time, in this case database connection, and say commit. Okay, so this has been a relatively sort of large amount of new code that we haven't tested in the meantime and see if it works. It might not work, you know what, I make mistakes all the time, we all do. So let's see if it does work. I'm going to start the application, and we don't have a validation check yet, so if I try to pass empty strings, I'm guessing it's going to raise an exception, especially when inserting into the database. It might not, but let's just not risk it. Here we have the username field. I'm going to say Python Bo. My first name is Bo or Bogdan, same thing. My phone number, well, I'm not really going to tell you my phone number, but let's just say it's 555-444-0000, and I'm probably not going to tell you my address either. Oh, you know what? Let's why don't I actually put my new weblog that I mentioned as an address? I mean, I know that I've pictured this as a home address, right? But you know, it doesn't really care what it is. Of course, I'll be approved, right? And if I hit add data, let's see what happens. Nothing happens. And why is that? Well, hopefully you've noticed that although I have defined a method right here, I haven't defined anything that's going to call this method. So we need to connect our events to an event handler, which in this case will be this method. An event called clicked, which is, you know, what we talked about earlier in this course, that the button emits every time it has been clicked. So this is fairly easy. I'm going to get our button, which is add data, has the object name, QObject name of add data, and I'm going to say clicked, connect self.add button clicked without the parenthesis. Now let's see what happens now. I'm going to input the same info that I've inputted before and say Python Bo with just the Bo, and we need to fix the tab order as well. We can do that later on. 555-444-000, I guess. And the address would be dev.bomilanovic.com, and I'm of course, like I said, approved. If I add data now, as you can see, it works just fine. It shows up in the table itself. So we have added the data to the table using these parts right here that I've talked about earlier. But how do I know that this is actually in the in the database itself? The way I know about it is I'm going to actually, let me, if I can find it, Bo Dev blog, there we go. I'm going to download a new program, and it's called SQLite Browser, and I'm just going to say SQLite Browser. This is the first one that I use. It's on sourceforge.net. It's an open source. I'm guessing that any kind of SQLite database browser would work. So if you just click here, and if you use Windows, it's going to offer you automatically for Windows. It's available on all platforms, as you can see. Extract it and run it. And let me actually find the directory where I've downloaded it to. Grab it here. I've extracted this to here, to this directory. And look at that, it's actually using Qt as a GUI environment or a GUI framework, but by the looks of it, it seems that it was written in C++, which would make sense, being as that Qt's originally written for C++. Anyway, double-click the SQLite browser, hit open, and remember to navigate. Now I have navigated already, but let me go back here for just a second. Remember to navigate to that app data folder that we have created from the os.environ That's that temporary folder. And if you just click on this icon and type the percentage app data percentage, that's what we did before with the run command, it's going to take you there. And you see that this PyDataMan folder has been created, and if I double click it, there's the PyDataMan or pydata.db file right here. Let me open it and look at it. There's our table that we have created, but there's no contents yet. But if I go to the browse data, you can see that the contents is there with our stuff. So that's pretty cool. I think I'd say that this is pretty nice. And if I actually, you can create new records, delete records from this database from this software in the database itself. But let me close this for a second and go back here, and I'm going to stop our application, which I can't find, so I'm going to stop right here. If I run it again, you can see that the table is empty. Why is that? Well, we're not loading any data into the table on the initialization. So later on, in later videos, in this init method, we're going to make a call to this load initial settings, and this will not only load the settings of the application itself, it will also load the main table with the data from the database that we have created, and it will also set the main table column widths. Anyway, that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any questions, let me know. Once again, I'd like if you join that Google Plus community, that'd be awesome. So we can stay in touch even outside Udemy and outside other websites and all that. So like I said, thanks a ton, and stay tuned for more videos to come.